A very good day, dear viewers. It's exactly 6 p.m. here in Cairo, and it's time for the news. And we start off with the headlines, dear viewers. I'll be right back with the headlines. President Fattah el-Sisi attends the third session of the Tokyo International Conference on African Development. Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli presides over a meeting on the planned development of Hurghada City. And Sudan awaits a new cabinet as premier malls line up. Welcome back, dear viewers. President Fattah el-Sisi today attended the third session of the Tokyo International Conference on African Development entitled Business Dialogue Between the Public and Private Sectors. Addressing the session, President el-Sisi said that Africa is among the most investment-attracting areas, calling on the private sector in Japan and also worldwide to pump more investments in the Black continent. He noted that African nations attach to special priority to cooperate with private sector institutions, especially in the infrastructure projects, a vital matter to accelerate trade exchange under the recently inked Continental Free Trade Agreement. As part of his activities in Yokohama City, President el-Sisi also took part in the African-Japanese Business Forum, saying that the continent is open to strong partnerships with other nations and international institutions who are interested in cooperation with Africa. The president said that the African nations are seeking to transform theoretical economic reform policies into executive programs which will change the lives of peoples and draw the future plans of action to realize the targets of the African Development Agenda 2063. The head of state added that over the upcoming months, the first report on African governance was issued during the African Union Summit in February of 2019, showing the progress made on this drive. He also hailed as a historical achievement the inking of the African Free Trade Area Agreement and launching its executive steps in the course of an extraordinary summit held in July 2019. On the sidelines of his current participation in the 7th Tokyo International Conference on African Development, currently held in the Japanese city of Yokohama, President Fattah el-Sisi met with a number of Asian and African counterparts on enhanced bilateral ties, as well as some regional and international issues of mutual concern. Details in the following report, dear viewers.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi met today with Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, with both leaders agreeing to support development efforts at the Nile Basin countries, as well as boosting bilateral ties without prejudice to the common interests or watersheds of any party. President el-Sisi held Museveni's wise political leadership and important role in consolidating African stability and peace. The Ugandan president, meanwhile, asserted that his country is open to cooperation with Egypt on all fronts, particularly the economic aspect. Separately, President el-Sisi held talks with UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, hoping that consultation would continue between Egypt and UN institutions to foster its development efforts along the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Guterres held Egypt's successful presidency of the African Union, expressing his keenness on enhancing cooperation with the country in light of its leading role in achieving regional as well as African security, stability, and peace. Stepped up efforts to intensify consultation between the African Union and the UN organizations on the global peacekeeping and post-conflict reconstruction efforts also featured prominently at the meeting. The head of state further received Japan's Trade and Industry Minister, voicing appreciation to the joint efforts for broadening economic and trade ties and hailing the Asian country's support for Egyptian institutions. President el-Sisi said he is looking forward for more Japanese investments into the national market in light of Egypt's many investments opportunities in different sectors. The Japanese minister, meanwhile, praised the positive economic developments recently witnessed in Egypt.
Prime Minister Mustafa Madbouli today presided over a meeting on the planned development of Hurghada city, saying that it was chosen among the 25 best touristic destinations worldwide. Madbouli said that the government took all procedures needed to develop the city in coordination between the tourism and environment ministries in order to organize trips to natural reserves and the touristic landmarks in the city, an important matter to increase the country's financial revenues of the tourist sector. The Prime Minister noted that the first phase of the city's upgrade is almost completed, adding that the preparations are undergoing to kick off the second and third phases. Moving on to Syria, where Syrian forces seized several towns and villages in the country's northwest today as deadly airstrikes hit an opposition-held bastion. Last week, the Syrian forces took control of the town of Khan Sheikhoun on a key highway that runs through Idlib province, linking Damascus to second city Aleppo. Overnight, Syrian forces announced they also managed to advance in the southern Idlib countryside. The ground offensive comes despite a deal between Russia and Turkey in September last year to protect the area with a planned buffer zone. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and German Chancellor Angela Merkel stressed the importance of reaching a political settlement to the Palestinian crisis based on the two-state solution. Addressing a joint press conference in Berlin, Germany, Merkel stressed the Palestinians' right in economic development, noting that her country will offer a support of 110 million euros to Palestine for developing projects. Palestinian President Abbas said that Germany has a prominent role in the Middle East, hailing the role played by Merkel in supporting Palestinians. Sudan's new Prime Minister Abdullah Hamdok was today locked in talks to form the first cabinet since the ouster of Omar al-Bashir. Sources said that Hamdok was still considering nominees for the cabinet. Sudan's Prime Minister has been due to name his key picks yesterday, following last week's swearing in of a joint sovereign council. The council is due to steer the country through a 3-year transition period. Moving on to Lebanon, where the Lebanese army opened fire on drones of the Israeli occupation forces in South Lebanon in a rare incident as tensions mount between the neighbors. The weekend incident sent tensions soaring, with Lebanon stressing its right to defend the country by any means after what it also describes as an attack. Earlier, the Lebanese army said it had fired at 2 of 3 drones in violation of its airspace before all returned across the border. Clashes between Libya's national army and militias affiliated to coalition government renewed today in the southern area of the capital Tripoli. Libyan army spokesman Ahmed al-Mismari announced the city of Marzaq came under attack from both militias of the coalition government and elements from Daesh terrorist group. The spokesman added that the remaining elements of the Daesh terrorist group formed what it called the Desert Army, which carried out a number of terrorist attacks in the region's northeast. Yemeni security officials said today that separatists have regained full control of Yemen's Aden following clashes with government forces who withdraw from the southern port city. Security officials said that the separatists brought massive reinforcements from other regions in what appeared to be a fresh effort to seize the nearby provinces of Abyan and Shabwa from government forces. Yemeni forces announced yesterday that they had seized back Aden from separatists who captured the strategic city on August the 10th after a fierce battle with that left at least 40 people dead. The European Union's diplomatic chief Federica Mogherini said today that the bloc would support talks between the United States and Iran, but only if the current nuclear deal with Tehran is preserved. Washington and Tehran have been locked in a bitter standoff since last year when U.S. President Donald Trump unilaterally pulled out of the 2015 deal that gave Iran relief from sanctions in return for curbs on its automatic program. The idea of direct talks between between Washington and Tehran as a way out of the crisis grew this week after Trump mooted the idea, and the new U.S. Defense Secretary urged Iran's leaders to engage. Moving on, dear viewers, to the financial segment, and now we start off with Egypt stock markets, whose indices regained actually and resumed their positive performance and rose during today's dealings, boosted by purchasing operations by foreign investors. The benchmark EGX 30 index added 1.6% to reach 14,829 points, and the capped EGX 30 index was also up by 1.3%. The medium capped index EGX 70 and the more expanded EGX 100 index both edged higher 0.5 and 0.6% respectively. Eurozone equity markets rebounded today, and London extended gains on positivity surrounding US-China trade talks. London's FTSE 100 index was up 0.9%. Frankfurt's DAX 30 also added 0.9%, and the Paris CAC 40 jumped 1.1%. Asian markets sank again as investors grow increasingly pessimistic about the outlook for China-US trade talks. Hong Kong shed 0.9%, Shanghai retreated 0.3%, and Tokyo was down 0.5%. Singapore and Seoul were each down 0.3%. Sydney, Taipei and Wellington all dipped 0.1%, and Manila gave up 0.3%. Oil prices slipped a tad after a gain of nearly 2% in the previous session. Brent crude futures fell 0.53% to $60.17 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude lost 0.36% to $55.58 per barrel. Yesterday, oil prices jumped as data showing a fall in U.S. crude stockpiles helped ease worries about weakening oil demand caused by the China-U.S. trade war. China hinted today that it may break the cycle of retaliation in the trade war with the United States as the pushing tariff battle threatens global economic growth. Last week, China and the United States exchanged the latest blows in the year-long trade dispute, with Beijing announcing it would hit $75 billion worth of U.S. goods in retaliation for Washington taking aim at about $300 million of its goods. U.S. President Donald Trump lashed out immediately in return by increasing existing and planned tariffs on a total of $550 billion in Chinese products.